Hi Vanguard fans, let's get down to it. This is another video in my Vanguard clan intro series talking about how to get yourself into the mindset of the different clans. In this video, I'm going to be discussing Narukami specifically. And Narukami is one of those stranger evolutions in the Vanguard clan history. Back in the day, they had Kagero, which their basic premise was they could retire things from the opposite side of the field, and they gained their advantages from doing such things. Narukami is a similar idea. You are still doing the same concepts of destroying the enemy's field, but the requirements and the things that they do are far more complicated. In exchange for that complication and those difficulties, they do increase the gains later on. You'll see what I mean in a minute. But Narukami is, when we get down to the lore, it is a clan of thunder dragons instead of the usual fire dragons. So you'll see a very different way of styling. I think it looks much nicer. We've got lightning everywhere and it makes it look a bit more dynamic, at least in a still picture. So yeah, that's Narukami in a nutshell, and I think in general, it is the more complicated clan to play, and because of this complication, we're going to have to discuss a couple of additional things when you talk about how to operate the clan properly and how to make them work. But in general, just play it very much like regular Kagero clan with additional requirements to make things possible. And that's how I'm going to treat them. So, we're going to be looking at 9 cards to get you up and running with how to think about the clan and how they operate. Let's get started with the G4 strides. First card we're looking at is Lightning Dragon Knight Zoras. Zoras' skill is when he hits a Vanguard, choose one of the rear guards, retire it. This is your opponent's choice. You choose 2 cards from the opponent's drop zone and bind them face up. Now, what I didn't note here is one of the funnier things with the later Narukamis is their reliance on binding things away from the opponent's entire setup out of the game. And in general, that does certain things in some sense. But for the most part, you don't have to worry about this. This is only important for some builds, but in general, it does do exactly the same thing as Kagero. You do retire something. In this case, it is the opponent's choice, which is an added complication to your benefit. Well, not really to your benefit, to your decision making, letting them have that decision, and it does make it more complicated in giving you the correct decision to make. That's pretty much all I can say about Zoras. Very simple card. It's one of the first strides that came out with this clan and how they do things. The second card that we're looking at is Conquering Supreme Dragon Conquest Dragon. And I couldn't really talk about Dragon without I couldn't really talk about Narukami without mentioning Dragon in general, because Dragon really shows you that they have a very different mindset. When you talk about Narukami, they don't actually deal too much with retiring the entire field. What is important to them is they retire the front row. In general, this is almost entirely interchangeable with the regular Kagero, because really you have much more front row exposure compared to the opposing situation, which is the back row. And in that sense, they have this advantage because they really like to play around with the front row. Basic skill. Choose a face down card with the same name from your G-zone. Turn it face up. If the number of cards in your G-zone is 2 or more, retire a front row, and all of your units in the front row get 5k for each open R that is on your opponent's side. Now, that means a plus 10k on the entire front row can be very devastating. It's a very, very fun, very powerful finisher. And it means that just because your opponent doesn't play, which would be the usual response to this, you do not get yourself out of the situation because you are still going to worry about far larger front rows. That is the G4. And down to the G3, you have Dragonic Kaiser Vermilion. We're going all the way back to the past, to the original boss of Narukami and how they operate. Limit Break, Counterblast 3, very, very expensive for its time, or even today really. Until end of turn, this unit gets plus 2k and battles every unit in the front row. over time, Narukami has evolved this idea. They've gotten to the point where they can plan out attacks to 4 or 5 targets at a time. And that seems to be their strength, attacking multiple things at once. And because of this multi-targeted field wipe, it is a very interesting clan because they take control of the opponent's inability to guard so many things at once. And essentially turns into a free retire. Because of these powerful effects and how they tend to play out, it is very interesting to note that even today, with some of the support that came out, Vermilion is a rather interesting and very powerful choice. Of course, you get the situations where your opponent realizes how to get around this, which I'll talk about later, but it is still a decent choice and does flow very well with the strides, which I really, really like, and it is a very decent card because it does show you that Narukami loves the front row. It loves to eat the front row. That's their nutritional breakfast. If they do not get their front row, they are actually far weaker than they first assume. Second card we're going to look at Armor Break Dragon. Armor Break Dragon is an interesting card because it shows you one of the more interesting things about this clan. Unlike Kagero, which has regular to high base power and the decent ability to retire, Narukami takes the far more complicated route. They like to do things a bit more fancy, a bit more powerful, but all the while requiring of you a far higher cost. Because of this far higher cost, you are talking about a much more difficult time planning things out. Counterblast 3, choose 3 cards in your hand, discard them, retire all rear guards in each fighter's front row, and this unit gets 10k and 2 crit. More or less a one-shot kill, and this card really does show you that unlike the way that Kagero thinks about things, you're going to be looking at a far greater end game, which was the basic premise behind Limit Break in the first place. You have a clan that focuses far more on planning, strategic thinking, getting themselves ready for that gigantic moment where they plan out something amazing in the late game, and then they play it out and suddenly win the game usually one turn faster than you might expect. Because of those reasons, I really think that Narukami is a decent clan to get into because it builds up into this grand finale that really works with the format of Vanguard. Armor Break Dragon really does show off this kind of thought, and I think it's a good card to teach you how to think when you're playing Narukami. Final card we're looking at is, of course, the one and only Eradicator Tempest Bolt Dragon. Counterblast 3 Eradicators, retire all rear guards of all fighters. Now this sounds terrible, in many ways it is, but his skill is probably one of those skills that garners such attention because of how strange it is. Continuous skill, during your turn, this unit gets 2k for each open R on both sides of the field. This means that he gets exponentially larger just because you don't play things and your opponent doesn't play things. He is a beast of a card and one that is very hard to plan for because you are dealing with a clan that can retire and pump himself while at the same time can choose to raise his own power level by not even playing cards and holding them in hand. Very powerful card. Really did shake up the meta and how things were made back in the day. I don't think it's played so much now because of the focus on strides, but I really think that Tempest Bolt really shows you the way that Narukami thinks. They are going to be complicated. They're going to involve a lot of strange requirements, but if you can fulfill those strange requirements, they have a far greater game, I think, than Kagero in some cases. Now, we're only going to look at one G2, but this G2 is such a big deal that everybody really uses it, and I don't see it moving out of the limelight for a very, very long time. Chatura, Demonic Dragon Beast Berserker, Chatura. Continuous, can't attack a rear guard, meaning it can only go face. During your turn, this unit gets 3k. When this unit's attack hits a Vanguard, you may pay the cost. If you do, draw a card. Choose a card from their drop zone, bind it face up. Chatura is a fantastic card. It is a 11k base that can do a counterblast 1, draw a card, and bind 1 for just hitting. And it's really, really good. It does the job. It can do many different things that do fuel the engine that is Narukami. It adds to your draw. It is efficient, and it can do the 11k without having to use a booster, which is really, really good and means that it can poke at the opponent even at 11k and force down guards when they don't want to be guarding. Very, very good card, and it's understandable why everybody loves this card, and I think it is a fantastic, maybe even too strong of a card. One of the biggest weaknesses of the card is because it only hits face, it is very easy to plan against, and you can see exactly where it's going, but I would still consider it a very good first target because of these essentially game-breaking power. That's the only G2 I'm going to look at. There's a lot of G2s in Narukami that are pretty good, but they do focus a lot on the archetypes and the different ways of play, which I don't want to deal into. When you watch these videos, I want you to look at them as a beginner into the clan looking in. You're going to be looking at cards that define the clan as is, and the G2 are maybe a bit too combo-ish for my taste and involve too much thinking to really plan out how to make a decent idea. It's more a great place to be if you are a deck builder, but not so much if you're just trying to learn the clan for the first time. The G1, on the other hand, and this is where I have to stop myself, the G1 is probably one of the more fantastic G1s in the given sets of Vanguard. Narukami has a gigantic wealth of great G1s, fantastic choices, interesting plays that they can make with their G1s, and I really think the defining factor on how you will think as a Narukami is going to be shown in your choice of G1s. The G1 list is exhaustive, it is filled with great cards, and we're going to look at two of them, but I would highly suggest you look very carefully at the G1s of your clan before you make any decisions on a Narukami deck, because the G1s have so much clarity and so many choices that it's going to be a fantastic place to start when you're trying to come up with a deck. First card in the G1s that we're looking at is, I think, one of the better PR cards that they've ever come out with, Dragon Dancer Stormy. During your main phase, when your opponent's rear guard is put into the drop zone, this unit gets 3k until end of turn. It's a 6k base, works on Vanguard and rear guard, although you'll never ever use this as Vanguard really. It is a very decent card, but it does show you one of the things that makes the clan somewhat, I think, more complicated than Kagero. In a default Kagero deck, you would say that this card is decent. Every time you kill something, you get these power boosts, and that's fine. In Narukami, the power boost is far harder to get because the requirements of getting to retire the opponent's side of the field are far more complicated, far more difficult to get into. And because of that difficulty, those power boosts come out sprinkled over the field and makes it very difficult to use this card. But if you can utilize it, you do get the power boost, and it does make for an awesome end game. Stormy is very well balanced in that respect because she is only good if you can get the rest of the deck to work properly. Otherwise, she's decent to not so good, and it really does show how one card in exactly the same wording can be very different, wildly different between two different clans. The next card we're going to look at is a card that you won't understand why I added here until later, but it's a card that was very old, maybe not seen so much nowadays because of the limited use, but I still wanted to note it because this is the history of Narukami. When this unit is placed on Vanguard or Rearguard, choose a continuous on one of your Narukami units. It loses that ability until end of turn. Now, you might not understand this, and I think we can skip over this, but Narukami has a lot of high impact skills. Skills that involve great things at the cost of far greater things. And because of that reason, they also include cards like this that can actually work around those limitations. They have the Exorcist, who can actually remove the downsides to give you the upsides on the cost of your card really doesn't do much else. And because of that reason, they are a very interesting clan. It really does show that this clan is high risk, high reward, and really does ramp up into a fantastic end game. We're gonna speed along to the last card, the G0, because the G0 will show you why I had to pick this G1. Deity Sealing Kid Soko is one fantastic card because it is a starter that is also a forerunner that does do 6k, which is unusual. Now, It is unusual for a couple of reasons, but probably the most important is it can't attack and it cannot boost. By using the previous card, as noted before, you can actually remove these skills as needed to make the required unit actually function as is. Do I think it's a great card? No, it's not a great card, but it does show you that when you're talking about Narukami, they involve a lot of very high costing effects for the purposes of pulling out some very fantastic skills later down. In general, that is the makeup of Narukami. They are a clan that starts out weak because their requirements are far higher and far more complicated, but their mid-game puts them in the same spot as most other clans, and by late game, they're a monster and should probably have been defeated in the mid-game. It is a very strong clan. It is a very good clan for an intermediate player to get into, because you are talking about a clan that starts out simple but complicates, and every decision going up into the late game actually does contribute, because it does create situations where you plan yourself into the late game, trying to make sure that you are in the strongest position and make use of all of these advantages you've built up over the game. Because of that, I would highly suggest that you play some other clans first, get a feel for the flow of the game, get a feel for how Bushiroad likes to run the back and forth of Vanguard, and once you understand this back and forth, you can finally understand how Narukami thinks, how they plan things out, and how they can make fantastic plays out of just simple beginnings. I didn't talk about the Eradicators, I didn't talk about Vanquisher, I didn't talk about the fantastic Thunderbolt mechanic, but in general, that is how Narukami thinks, and that is how you're going to be running your ideas through these different archetypes. They will involve a lot of planning, a lot of pre-planning, a lot of strong effects, usually appended by a very difficult requirement, and you have to plan out your strategy step by step. But if you can get these steps roughly right, you can get a very, very powerful end game, which they are fantastic at, and usually by that point, if you're still alive, you're probably going to win. That's all I have to say for Narukami. Narukami is a fantastic clan. I think it has a lot of potential. It's got a lot of strengths, got a lot of fantastic skills. They can do re-stands, they can do re-rides, they can do just power boost because your opponent forgot to play something. Just because you played something doesn't mean that they can't remove it. They've got a good situational awareness, they have a powerful placement, and they have skills that put them one step above many of the other clans. And I think it is a really, really, really good clan for many different reasons. And for all of those reasons, I have to give it the intermediate to high ranking, and you have to really understand some of the concepts of the game before you start playing this clan. This has been Extreme Wirehead, and I'll see you for the next clan intro whenever that's gonna happen. Peace.